So Trent, can you just confirm that we see this okay?
We see it. It's not yet in the perfect. It's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, so we may have to rely more on the oral mode because like every statement here is like appears that it's time. Okay, so I want to talk about the way the texts were created. I mean, that's what I thought I would say. And I used the picture from the invitation. See, look at the picture here. Actually, it's funny. There's a mistake in the statue, right? Because he should be doing a Dhammacakkappavattana mudra because, right, it looks like he's teaching. He's not the Bhumi Sparsha, right? But so let's say the Buddha's teaching here, and we're actually trying to access the Buddha's teaching through the text. Okay, let's say that would characterize like maybe the main way we approach these texts. We want to see what the great teacher actually said. Okay, so then we read these discourses, and of course there's also Vinaya and Abhidhamma, and I don't want to talk about that today. Let's just say all we have is the discourses. Okay, so what do we have? All these records which present themselves as if these are records, historical records of the Buddha's teachings, okay? As if the Buddha was at a certain place, somebody came and talked to him, and this is what he said, okay? But what I'm going to say is that that's just pretending. This will emerge like later in the talk, there may be a way actually to access real historical, I don't know, facts, but processes through these materials. But it's not about the details. The stories aren't true, and they're usually not trying to be true. There may be certain discourses that are based on real historical incidences. I'm not trying to deny that. But I'm not saying the Buddha didn't teach the doctrines that are found in the Nikayas, in the Sutta Pitaka. I'm not saying that. But it's not as it appears, okay? So then, there's the question: will it take us back to the Buddha? And let's just kind of see what tradition is telling us about these texts. So tradition thinks this is a Theravada tradition, right, which has preserved these texts, maybe even created them as in the way we know them. That there was they call it a council or a sangiti, a recitation, a joint recitation, not long, maybe 3 months after the Buddha's death. Because Mahakassapa was like the leading monk then, and he realized that things are going to get really messy if they don't establish a real canonical corpus. And like they always, in the text, they're always like kind of poking at the Jains who haven't done that, and then they're just fighting with each other all day. They like to poke at the Jains, I think, because they're the early Buddhist main rivals. So the Buddha just died, and as I said, that's a very, very emotionally potent, pregnant moment. People are very, very sad. And when Ananda, the Buddha's attendant, goes from place to place on his way to Rajagaha, where the assembly is going to take place, the council, people say, they meet him and they're crying. We used to come here with the Buddha, and now you come alone. And Ananda is not yet enlightened. Lucky for us, he gets enlightened on the night before this council is going to take place, and supposedly, right? So we have Ananda as one of the key figures here, and there are 500 arahants. So arahants, what does that mean for us? And the trust we have in the textual tradition, supposedly, is 500 people who have no personal interest, who have put the text together. No ego, no personal desire, no need for any enjoyment or other. So it's a very, very faithful account. And Ananda has this perfect memory, and he was the Buddha's attendant, so he witnessed all these events, and then the tradition records them and classifies the text into the longer ones, the Digha Nikaya ones, the middle length ones, and then there are other kinds, the Samyutta and Anguttara. And I'll forget about it. If anybody knows what the Khuddaka Nikaya is, we'll talk about that another day. So there are 4 collections, and they're entrusted to the 4 of the Buddha's most senior disciples, and they establish what's called the Bhanika tradition, what scholarship likes to call the Bhanika system. These are professional reciters that kept the text faithfully until this day. Now, okay, so basically for tradition, what we get in the text is the words of the Buddha. And what we can say about this, scholarship has been quite skeptical of this account, rightfully so. I'll say something about this in a minute. But basically, what they tell us, this is like a kind of established fact in Buddhist studies, which probably should be looked into more carefully, because it's based on only like these 2 verses in certain kind of historiographical text. But the texts were written a few hundred years after the Buddha died in Sri Lanka. And then within the context of the Mahavihara, which is the major, call it, sect in Sri Lanka at the time, under the leadership of Buddha Gosa, the main commentator, and who probably worked with the teams. He were composed the commentaries on the text. And then the commentaries, they comment on the suttas according to a word-by-word format, and then the text can kind of be verified. So scholarships have been quite skeptical. Okay, I don't want to take too long, so I'm not going to mention the names and the different views here. Okay, but like scholars have said, we have no way to verify this account, and what we get is the Mahavihara's need to announce that it holds the one true canon in order to get support in the context of sectarial rivalry in Sri Lanka. We can't take this as a testimony to what really happened in early Buddhism. And scholarship is justified in some of this skepticism, and in other parts it's not. There could be a scholarship is very interested in discrepancies between the texts and contradictions, but contradictions may be a different way of saying things. They need not necessarily be a mistake okay, but one thing that is very important for scholarship today is the fact, and you may have heard Peter Skilling's talk a couple months ago about the different canons about that exist within Buddhism. So take a text like the Satipatthana Sutta on the foundations of mindfulness, which many of you would know. If you take the Chinese version of this text and the Pali version, then they're very different. They share certain elements, but others diverge. And then the question, what does this mean? So what scholars like to do, what has become like the most popular scholarly approach to this text, which began in the 50s mainly, or actually begun earlier, but like in the 1950s, there were important works that used this method. And Analayo, who many of you may know, a German monk scholar, has done incredible work on these comparative methods. And then you compare, and supposedly where the texts agree, that's what the Buddha really said, or as close as you can get. Okay, and then people who practice this approach and others have become quite optimistic in our ability to know what really happened at the beginning. Okay, so I mentioned the Satipatthana. So we have, what do we do when we have different texts and they give us a different understanding of what the Satipatthana is? But then also, if we want to be serious and look, and there's lots of texts to talk about sati, and they work in different ways, and they're not all saying the same thing. They coalesce at certain points, and they break. Some sati emphasizes the body, some emphasizes the breath, some emphasizes more conceptual aspect, some will include jhana and samadhi. Others will not. Why is that? Because the tradition, in my view, okay, is not so fixed as we would like it to be. They're experimenting. They're connecting between sati, right, mindfulness, and other philosophical ideas, other modes of practice, other meditations. And then a text like the Satipatthana is more like a grid in which each tradition can insert its own understanding of the practice. And when we're comparing the versions, we're not getting to any core. At best, we get the grid, and the grid isn't what is important. What is important is the dynamic in which there are different types of practice that early Buddhists, and let's try to, I'm kind of gonna incline today to talk about the meditative world that these texts may introduce us to. I hope we'll have enough time for that. It's also formulaic. You practice this meditation, and then you practice another and another, and you're using these formulas, right? That was the second element, is these fixed elements, these fixed textual elements within the oral sequence, okay? Right?